share. The Patterson unit. This is a this is a regular lecture of mine, and it was formerly called A New Approach. The new approach I'll tell you about in a slide or two, but the reason it got called the Patterson unit was because I got booked to do a talk one evening, and I went on their website to find out where I had to go to have a look at the map, and I found that they had called it the Patterson unit. And I thought, well, if they're going to start calling it the Patterson unit, I might as well as well. So that's how it got named that. I'll mention again that I've got a book out. It's now back in print. It was out of print for a time, Beekeeping: A Practical Guide. I also own and manage the Dave Cushman website, which I will mention probably one or two times during the event. I'm sure as established beekeepers, you will all not know of that anyway. Virtually everybody or every webinar we've done, somebody's asked about the dogs. Well, there they are, Nell and Rosie, and they are just along a passageway. So if anybody answers or knocks on the door, they will be answering it for me. So why a new approach then? Don't forget that was the original title. Well, it's changing circumstances. Beekeeping's moving all the time. Pests and diseases have come in recent years that weren't here before. Things like Varroa, associated viruses, and that sort of thing. In recent years too, probably the last 20, 25 years, we've had heavier than normal colony losses, mainly during the winter, but there's quite a lot of losses during the summer now, where we never used to, well, very, very rarely got them. A colony can collapse quite quickly during the summer these days. Also, there's a problem with the queens that I've now been mentioning and writing about for about 20 years. Early supersedure of young queens, young queens especially, failing. In fact, I only had one yesterday, and queens simply disappearing. And I know a lot of people are saying these things aren't happening, but if I tell you that last Wednesday we did an inspection, management inspection at Wisborough Green Teaching Apiary, and we came across 2 colonies where the queens had disappeared since the previous inspection. And it's mainly as a result of these problems that I introduced this system I'm going to explain to you around about 15, 16 years ago now. The queen problems are on Dave Cushman's website if you want to have a look. The problem is, of course, these days they are so common that people think that they're normal. They're not normal, and sooner or later somebody's going to find out the reasons. But of course, as a result of these things, we need remedial action. Often it's needed quite quickly too. With what I'm going to talk to you about, there will be apiary management benefits too, and I'm sure the smarter beekeepers amongst you will be able to say, oh, I could tweak that to suit my system. It's not really a new approach. It's really a different sort of approach of how we manage our colonies and our apiary. So what's different about it then? Well, perhaps a change of attitude, because I'm finding that a lot of people, especially the smaller beekeepers, treat their colonies as individuals. And I have always treated my apiary as a whole, or, you know, in sort of sections. And all it is that you take a number of colonies, call it a block, call it a group, call it what you like, and they are honey producing colonies, and you put with it one support colony, and that little lot becomes what I'm calling a unit. As those of you who've followed me over the years will know, I tend to get my brood combs drawn out above a queen excluder because the bees do produce much better combs, and you've got them available if indeed you need them. And that is part of what I'm going to explain to you. That's it, folks. Nothing more really. I could walk away now, but I'm not going to because we've got another 50 minutes or 55 minutes in front of us. But I think if you've got a little bit of vision, you'll see that the system that I'm going to show you is very, very flexible. And I hope you'll be able to find, in fact, I'm sure you'll be able to find other things that you can do other than what I'm telling you. There is, however, a warning, as with most things these days. I am quite happy to freely advocate moving combs and bees between colonies. I know some people frown upon that because of disease, but my attitude is if you can recognize disease and you know how to deal with it, that's the place to stop it, not just assume you won't get it by not moving combs around. Now, throughout this presentation, there'll be a key. Those there are the combs or what's in them. So obviously the black one is old comb, yellow for foundation, and so on. A full colony will be displayed in that colour, full honey producing colony that is, and a support colony will be in green, either as a full colony or a nucleus. Now they can be one or the other, it doesn't really matter. If I put, let's say, a nucleus box up there, it doesn't matter if it's a full box or the other way around. So what am I suggesting then? A number of colonies. 4 seems to be to work quite well. So 4 honey producing colonies with one support colony to help it. Now, the very first time I gave this lecture, a man at the end, question time, complained bitterly because he wasted all the evening because he'd only got 2 colonies. Well, as I explained to him, you can still use this system anywhere between sort of 2 colonies right up to 1,000 if indeed you want to. If you've got, let's say, 2 colonies, that's fine. 3 colonies, you've got a unit. 4 colonies, you've got a unit. 5 colonies, a unit. 6 colonies, you can make your mind up whether it's 1 unit of 6 or 2 individual units of 3. Because beekeeping really is very flexible, and this system is flexible too. As already mentioned, using the brood box as a super within that group, and hopefully your maths will be able to work out why as we go through. That is at the beginning of the season, filled up with foundation, so hopefully the bees will draw it out, produce you some honey and also some good combs as well. Very often if you go to somebody else's apiary, this is what you see. If perhaps they've got 4 colonies, they're very rarely the same. You might get one really good one, others less so, and perhaps even one dead. Perhaps if you go to somebody with 8 colonies, you've got the same thing doubled, and then probably 12 colonies exactly the same thing. And I'm sure if you spoke to any bee disease officer who go around and see a lot of beekeepers, they'll tell you that in general, these are how a lot of people, or these are the ways a lot of people keep their bees. This is what I'd like to see. Groups of 4, all fairly similar in productivity, with a support colony with each sort of roughly 4, doesn't really matter, and also in each group a brood chamber that's producing the brood comb. Now, it seems to me always that the better beekeepers have generally got all their colonies roughly the same productivity, probably for two reasons, I would think. One is are actually quite good beekeepers themselves, and the other is that they've got some really good bees, and they're not just relying on either swarms that are coming in or perhaps some buying queens, imports, and all sorts of things like that. It does affect things. So here's a photograph that some of you saw last week or the week before. This is one of my colonies with a brood chamber on, so that's all I do. So consequently, you get nice straight combs, which after extraction are like that. They are incredibly valuable during the summer. So this is the unit. This is the Whisper Green teaching apiary, or now the old Whisper Green teaching apiary. And there's a couple of points I'd like to make before I go too much further. Firstly, as a teaching apiary, you can produce a lot of honey. I know there's a lot of people say, oh, you can't produce honey in a teaching apiary. There's your evidence. We've got single brood chambers there on absolutely everything. I know there's a double down there, or what looks like a double, but I'll explain that in a minute. There's 5 supers on a lot of colonies there, 4 on others. Yes, you can get honey, good crops of honey, off single brood chamber colonies. All you need are the right bees to fill them. And the other thing is, there's a very old saying: bees in the wood never did good. There's bees in a wood, and there's your sort of evidence they do. But look at the sunshine; it's dappled, and no colony there has got full sun on it all day long. So it's reducing the swarming problems, all sorts of things like that. Anyway, that's the end of that. This system, until the last couple of years, we demonstrated it for several years as a particular group. So one group will just look after those 4 colonies each time they come. So basically what it is, assume this is you folk at home. Let's say you've got 4 colonies, take 4 honey producing colonies. Now to look after that, you have a support colony, which is usually smaller, but not always. And I'll explain that as I go through. That brood chamber there that you may well have thought was a double brood chamber, in fact isn't. It's a foundation that's been drawn out, brood foundation that's been drawn out. So that's it, simple. Just take those 4 colonies in your back garden, or if you've got a dozen colonies, 3 groups exactly the same. So my support colony is planned right from the start. It's part of my management system. It's not just an afterthought or something that I've decided to do sort of willy-nilly. Now it varies considerably, or it can do anything from sort of 1 comb sometimes up to a full colony, sometimes with supers on. Its sole purpose is to support the honey producing colonies, and I'll explain some ways that can be done later. But there are other benefits that can be gained as well. Now it may change colonies, and it could do for all sorts of things, like perhaps one colony of your one of your honey production colonies has gone weak, perhaps there's a problem with a queen in it or whatever, and your support colony has overtaken it, swap them over. As I said, it's a very, very flexible system. Now, that little colony may well be out of balance occasionally, and as I go through, you'll realise why. But the sort of things that can happen is we either add brood to it or take it away. We milk the flying bees off, all sorts of things like that. So it can be out of balance. But good beekeepers ought to be able to manage that sort of situation. And if the colony does get in a little bit of problem, let's say it runs a little bit of short of food, they can deal with it. As I've already mentioned, it was used to demonstrate at the Whisper Green Beekeepers Association teaching apiary, certainly for several years. We haven't done it for a couple of years because of the potential move. And of course, COVID-19 this year, lockdown. That, in fact, is probably the hardest working colony in the apiary. Not only does it provide bits and pieces for within its own group, but they can very often provide things like queens for other colonies as well. Because, of course, we being a teaching apiary, we run several different colonies for different reasons. So how do you make a support colony then? Well, there are several methods and combinations. I'm assuming you'll probably want to keep it in your own apiary. If not, perhaps it can be brought in from an out apiary or whatever that you've got. If it's made up in your own apiary, of course, when it's initially made up, of course, you need to keep the strength up. But I spoke about that a little while ago, and I should probably be speaking about it in the next two webinars. Now, these can be made to suit the circumstances. That's your circumstances at the time, and one year may well be different from another. In fact, could be very, very different. So here's our options. We've got standard nucleus, perhaps 4, 5, 6 frames. We've got a 2-frame nuke that I've recently described, which for those who didn't come along, is just simply a frame of food and a frame of sealed brood with adhering bees, and that's it. That will build up during the summer and provide all you need for your other colonies. If you're the sort of person that does artificial swarms, then of course you get increase, and you can either use the parent colony or the increased colony, the so-called swarm, for your support colony. Absolutely fine. Or any other swarm prevention or control method that you found or you dreamt up or whatever. If it includes increase, you can make it up from that. There's no reason why it shouldn't be a swarm. And of course, with a swarm, it's going to be absolutely free. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. So what do you need then for your support colony? Equipment wise, virtually nothing. You've got it all. So no specialist equipment at all, no boards or anything of that nature. Nucleus box is handy, but not essential. You can use a full brood chamber if you want to. No problem at all. If you want to partition it off, you can, but I don't bother. What you do need, of course, are spare hive parts, which a lot of beekeepers tend to have, but they don't need to be your best ones. They can be some that have had repairs done to repairs, if you get what I mean. So making one unit then. Here's a couple of colonies that perhaps come to the winter, or it could be 3 or 4. The numbers really aren't important, as I've said. So if perhaps you've got 10 colonies, you could probably make 2 or 3 units out of that. If you've got 15, you make 3 or 4. It's best if they're close together, and you'll find out why a bit later, but it's not very important. It really isn't. With beekeeping, you can get away with an awful lot by using a bit of gumption. If you've got no existing colony that's suitable, then just make one. So perhaps the ideal thing perhaps is if one colony's come to the winter weaker than the rest, and it's not going to be a full honey producing colony till, let's say, June, then use it. So as the season progresses, perform your normal colony inspections. And don't forget to add your supers and a brood chamber foundation per unit. If you're in an oilseed rape area, I suggest that you get the brood chamber on early, because if you get a flow from the oilseed rape, most colonies, most strong colonies, will build out and fill one of those. I've had them done in a week. Okay, it's a bit of a rarity, but you've got to be prepared for these things. Get it on quick. You can then whip it off, extract it, and you've within a couple of 3 weeks, perhaps 4 at the most, you've got yourself a good box of combs. So when you're ready, make your support colony, and it really is up to you. And as I say, down to whatever circumstances you've got at the time. So that's all with that lot. So what now then? Whoops. As in a lot of beekeeping, just use your imagination, experience, and your own particular circumstances. So let's look then at a few possibilities. Just reminded me, Nick.
Yes?
Did you tell them how to put in questions?
I didn't, Roger. So if anyone wants to submit a question, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. We have had one in, so just type in your questions and then we'll answer those at the end.
Okay. Right, it's taken up a few minutes. So let's have a look at a few possibilities, the sort of things that you can do. You can do all of these things anyway, but it just makes it a little bit easier with this system. So if perhaps you've got old comb or poor combs, perhaps you haven't produced good comb like I suggest, and you do have some quite poor combs in, bees have chewed the foundation up or they're built all over the place. This is nice and easy to deal with, because all you do is make up your support colony with perhaps one old comb from each colony, or a poor comb, as many as you like. Because once you get up to 2 or 3, then that colony can look after itself quite easily. So as many as you like. Replace with drawn comb. Don't forget your drawn comb's but already been prepared, because you have done it either early in the season or last season. So it should be perhaps in your shed. So immediately you've got almost 10% your brood chamber changed straight away. A little bit later, you can transfer it to a full brood chamber. Don't leave it too long, because don't forget those 4 combs, 3 or 4 combs or whatever, they're going to be emerging. And as I said last week or the week before, 1 frame of brood becomes 3 frames of bees when it emerges. So this little colony can actually expand quite quickly, depending, of course, how you make it up. So transfer it to a brood chamber, and then add more old combs at intervals, because you can shake the bees off, because what's already in there is expanding, and they can look after another comb of brood, and a few days later perhaps another comb of brood, all the way through. So you fill your box up. I know the numbers haven't quite worked out, but you know the principle. And then replace with drawn comb, and immediately you can see that you put 2 new combs in each of those colonies in 1 year. Now, if you do this every year, it doesn't take very long before you do a comb change on a cycle. So when your support colony fills up the box, add a brood chamber of drawn comb, which of course you get from your shed. And when the queen's laying well in the top box, reverse the boxes when she's laying in both. You don't have to put it on the top. You can put it on the bottom. You've got your own ways of doing things. It's not for me to tell you that bit, but they all work and they all work well. You can add it in, add a queen excluder between the boxes so the queen doesn't lay in the poor comb. And you can do all sorts of things. The top box can be used as a super. I know some people don't like extracting honey out of combs that have had brood in. Also, uncapping comb with cocoons in can be a bit of a tough job. You know, it's up to you how you get the honey out of that those combs. Now, in the meantime, this colony can still be used as a support colony. Still be used. Now, if your support colony's got good comb and you don't need to change it, that's absolutely fine. If it builds up, all you just do is super it. So, okay, you've got an extra honey producing colony. If you don't want it, there are lots of things you can do. And I know these days, surprisingly, a lot of beekeepers aren't really interested in the honey, but many are. Again, it can still be used as a support colony because that's the one that's sort of perhaps sacrificial is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. If you want to requeen one of your honey producing colonies, you've got a ready-made queen there. There's no point in having a poor queen in your support colony. That ought to be one of your better ones because sooner or later it's going to be needed in one of your honey producing colonies. So perhaps the queen is starting to fail, or perhaps a little bit spiky, or they run around on the combs, you know, the sort of things that you'd rather not have. Or perhaps if the colony goes queenless or a drone layer, drone layers are sometimes quite difficult to deal with, especially if they're laying workers. Well, then just drop a nucleus straight down in the middle of the colony, and that usually works. It needs to be about 3 or 4 combs so that it can defend itself. Now, to replace her, if you've got queen cells elsewhere, there you are, or perhaps another unit or another beekeeper, or perhaps if you've got your own queen rearing program, you can take one from there, or perhaps if your local association is raising queens, or another beekeeper, during the summer you can get lots of queen cells. If it's reasonably strong, let's say five combs or more, and it's well populated with bees, densely populated with bees, you can raise one under the under the emergency impulse. That'd be absolutely fine. I've raised emergency queens in as small as 3 comb colonies, if they're well covered with bees, that is. I know some people will frown upon it and say, oh, scrub queens. No, do what I told you, I think, at the last webinar. And if you don't cut the emergency cells out for the second wave, you generally end up with some good ones. Now, if a colony has a brood break, here's a neat little trick for you. So perhaps that colony's got a brood break. Could be something you've done with swarm control, or perhaps the queen's disappeared. You're probably going to have a brood break of approaching 3 weeks, if not 3 weeks. This is a nice, neat little trick, because once the Varroa emerges, or sorry, once the brood emerges, all the Varroa are going to be on the bees. That then gives you an opportunity to the lower the numbers. So what you do is put a frame of comb, preferably drone, in your support colony if it's strong. Otherwise, just put it in one of the other colonies. Okay, you might have to juggle the combs around a little bit. And one thing I didn't mention when I was talking about getting brood combs drawn above the queen excluder, some of them are drone, because I tend to put one drone comb in each colony. So I've got spare drone comb anyway. So put preferably a drone comb in your support colony. And after about 7 or 8 days, you can put that into the colony with a brood break. Now, I've got 7 to 8 days. In reality, it's usually about 9 or 10, because it takes a queen perhaps a couple of days to start laying it up. And then you need to be about a day before it emerges. I'll put 7 to 8 days there to suit the weekend beekeepers, because there's getting more of them. And it's that group of beekeepers that I don't think beekeeping overall is accommodating as well as perhaps it should do. So you leave it in there, and when it's sealed, place it in the freezer for a few days. How long's a few days? Well, in my experience, a week is usually long enough. I tend to wrap it up, put it in a, well, I've got animal food bags. So they're quite tough plastic, so nothing is going to jag them. If you just wash the outside, put the comb in there, you should be okay. And of course, in amongst that should be an awful lot of your Varroa. Now, helping with swarm prevention, perhaps if your main colonies are building up to the point where you think, hang on, I'm going to have some swarm cells being put up soon. Keep an eye on the weather. Keep an eye on, or an ear rather, on what's happening in your locality. If other people are starting to see lots of swarms, you get lots of swarm calls, assume that yours might be thinking along the same sort of lines. So simply just take a comb or two of brood out of your main colonies and put them in your support colony, and then of course fill up with empty comb, replace with empty comb, drawn comb. Now, if you want to weaken a support colony for whatever reason, it could be perhaps to bolster the forage force in a production colony, or perhaps if you feel that your support colony is getting too big, you can't be bothered with super in it, and you want to make it smaller. This is one of the reasons that I said get them, don't have them too far apart, because what you can do is move it in stages towards the destination. This one is going towards the end. Don't forget the usual sort of 3 feet at a time. Experienced beekeepers can get away with more than that. Now, if you get a really good flying day, you can move it 3 feet several times a day. Because what you find is, and you can check this out yourself, you won't find it in books, I don't think. If perhaps you move something at 8 o'clock in the morning, by about 11, all the bees are orientated to that position. Move it again, and at 3 o'clock do the same again, and you can move it quite a bit. Don't do it on a cool day, because the more you get into beekeeping, the more you'll realise that not all foraging bees fly on cool days every day. So move it up close to the colony, well, foot away I do, right next door to it. Important thing is leave it there for a day or two in good flying weather, so the bees actually get locked onto that position. Now, because what we're going to do is move that away, we're going to add the flying bees from that colony to the honey producing colony. Now, you're probably going to double the foraging force of the honey producing colony, but you're not going to double the brood, which of course is very hungry. Therefore, as you get with a brood break, bees will actually store quite a lot more nectar or honey, call it what you like, than if they're on their own. So have a look at the weather forecast. If the next week is going to be really warm, slap 2 supers on. Don't be frightened of doing it. The bees ain't going to put anything in them if they're in the back of your shed. So slap a couple of supers on and then move the support colony right away. Say right away, you know, it depends how big your garden is. 10 foot would be okay, because what's going to happen is the flying bees will fly out from it, go out to forage, come back to where they've locked into in the last 2 or 3 days, and what they will do then is can't find their home, so they go in the nearest hive and they'll get diverted to what's next to them. As soon as 1 or 2 come in and they start fanning, they draw the rest in. Now, going back a little bit, why I said 2 to 3 days is if this colony was over here and you just moved it there and moved it back after a day, bees will very often look to where they were the previous time, which might well have been here. They seem to need to lock in. They don't do it instantly. It takes them a little bit of time to get used to it. Anyway, they'll divert to that, and of course you'll probably, if the support colony is fairly strong, you're almost going to double the foraging force. Now, if it is still too strong, leave it for a couple or 3 weeks to recover. And because it's out of balance, what will happen is the colony itself will shunt forward the tasks of the bees, and they will go out and forage earlier than they would normally have done. They can compensate a lot more than I think we give them credit for. So it'll probably take them a couple of 3 weeks to have as much flying activity as they had when you moved them back there. Then do the same again. It could be with the same colony or perhaps another one. And this actually works very well if you've got there's no point doing it if you haven't got a nectar flow on, no point whatsoever. So you do need to keep an eye on the weather, certainly for a week in advance. And with tricks like this, I have had supers filled and sealed within a week. So then move it away again. Now, if it's still too strong, you can swap brood for food combs with the producing colonies if you want to. So perhaps, I mean, don't forget again that if you've got frames of sealed brood in your support colony, if you put just 1 comb into each of the other colonies, there's an extra 3 frames of bees in 10 to 12 days, or within 10 to 12 days, should I say. Various other options. If you've got more units, you can perhaps swap positions with the weaker support colony in one of the other units, or perhaps move brood, all sorts of tricks that beekeepers can come up with themselves. If you can't do that, perhaps you can split it if you want to increase. If not yourself, then perhaps for sale, or perhaps stocking beginners, helping beginners. And this could be a good way of local beekeeping associations providing bees for their own beginners, getting their members to do it. Okay, you can reimburse them for the frames and foundation or whatever, that's no problem. But there's no real cost to it, and it's going to help the local association. Or perhaps if you've got a decent 5-comb nucleus, depending on where you are in the country, perhaps 120, 150 pound of money coming in. If you don't like producing honey, just produce a few bees. So at the end of the season then, you can leave a support colony if it's strong enough to overwinter. When I say strong enough, this last winter, I overwintered 3 and 4 comb nukes that were well covered with bees. Okay, it was a bit of a special winter, but they all came through and rattled away in the spring. In a cold winter, you're probably going to lose a few, but I would certainly say that in most parts of the country, if you've got 5 combs well covered with bees and it's got plenty of food, got a good queen and healthy bees, you ought to be able to get it through the winter. What have you got then? Well, you've got another support colony for next year, and probably more importantly, you've overwintered a queen that you may well not have overwintered anyway. And one of the reasons for people saying they buy imports is they get queens early in the season to replace what's died out over winter. Here's one here. It's going to suit your area because it's been raised in your area, and it's not going to cost you anything at all, and you know about it because you raised it yourself. If you don't want the increase or extra colony, you can unite it to another colony in perhaps the same unit, or perhaps you unite it to another colony in another unit, or perhaps another support colony. If it's small, perhaps it's only on 3 frames, it shouldn't be at that time of the year, but you may well have got rid of a nucleus back end of July, and you know, the sort of things that happen. You can actually bolster it with sealed brood from your main colonies, because any time after perhaps the end of July, the brood that or the adult bees that come from that emerge from the end of July onwards really aren't going to do very much foraging, so they might as well go in and help bolster up your small colony for you. So the possibilities then are absolutely endless. There are limits. That, of course, will be the beekeeper, but that's par for the course anyway. So the benefits of what I've told you: we have a more flexible management system. Absolutely no extra equipment needed. I haven't asked you to buy anything, so there's virtually no cost to it. What I didn't mention was that usually those small colonies produce enough honey that you don't need to feed them, so there's no cost to that. You can use poorer equipment if you want to. So perhaps if you've got a brood chamber with a woodpecker hole or something covered up with a bit of the end of a baked bean can or whatever, you can use that. It helps overcome what I call the modern problems, which are the queen problems, Varroa, the associated viruses that are making beekeeping very much more difficult than the craft was when I started. You've got support colonies that can, or colony then, that can be overwintered, which is a great boon, because as much as anything, you can make up winter losses before they happen. And if you've got a unit of 4 plus a support colony, if you've got 25% losses, which a lot of people have, I've heard of even bee farmers this last winter, having 50% losses. You know, and that's bee farmers. You've made your winter losses up before they happen. It's much better doing that than stretching everything in the spring. You can make increase if you want to, because instead of making increase from your honey producing colonies, you make them from the support colony. At the end of the day, you've achieved what the original intention of this system was, and that is to keep all honey producing colonies fully productive, so that you're not robbing one to get some brood to put in as a test comb or whatever for other colonies, or to raise queens, because you've got a ready supply there. It's almost like having a little shop on your doorstep. You've got new brood combs that are well built, so none of this bees building a comb on the side of stale foundation where they want to, or chewing holes in it. It's one good way of replacing your old and poor combs, and it's a nice, easy way of doing it. I have to say, I don't like shook swarm. I think it's very invasive on a colony, and this is an easier way of doing it. And you can expand it quite a bit on what I've explained to you, because you can perhaps get your support colony queen to lay up your new combs, and then just transpose them for what's in your other colonies. There's all sorts of things like that. I don't think I've ever done it, but I'm just thinking on the hoof, sort of thing you can do. Help with Varroa control if indeed you've got a brood break, but even then you could probably engineer a brood break if you wanted to. One great thing is you've got spare queens, and there's so many people, they panic when they lose a queen, and they go online and buy one which may well not suit their area. They just get it from anywhere, and they don't know anything about it. But here's one that you raise yourself, so you know where it's come from, you know what characteristics, you know what management system that it needs. And of course, there's an opportunity to cull poor bees, because that's one thing I haven't mentioned, that if perhaps you've got, well, I mentioned it briefly, if perhaps you've got a touchy colony or spiky, one a bit spiky, or they run around all over the place, or perhaps they've got chalk brood, all sorts of things like that. You can cull. I really ought to say queens, not bees. I'll change that. Sorry, folks. But that's it. Thanks for your attention, and any questions?
Right, Roger. We've got a number of questions come in. A few who've been asking, drone brood comb in the freezer. What do you do to get the drone comb back when the frame is removed from the freezer?
Oh, if you've got some chickens, they love it. If you hang it up in the garden or lean up against a tree or something like that, you'll find that birds will come and peck them out, and within a very short space of time, they will peck them out. Or I've actually put them back into a colony just to see how long it takes them to get rid of it, and they really do clear them out very quickly.
Okay, thanks. Whereabouts in the brood box do you put the drone comb?
Anywhere you like. If it's, oh, sorry. I thought you meant to get it drawn out. If you have done what I've done, which is remove a lot of wild colonies from trees and buildings and that sort of thing, what you find is that the brood comb is around about 10 to 15% of the total area, not number of cells, the total area. and it's on the periphery. So what I do with certainly a big colony, I don't, with single brood chamber, I don't put it the outside comb, I put it the next one in. Now, during the spring, as the colony is building up, what I also tend to do is put it right next to the brood and then move it out as the queen starts expanding. And what that does two things. Firstly, it gets the queen starting to lay drones, which is not a bad thing if you've got good colonies. And the other thing is that one side of the box, you don't get stacked out with pollen, because bees don't usually, I have seen pollen in drone cells, but it is quite rare. Bees usually don't put pollen in drone combs. So, and then of course, as the colony builds up, keep moving it out until get to the point where it's the next one to the outside, and that's where I leave it.
Thanks. Okay, when you're talking about the laying worker colony and you added the nuke combs, do you add them directly without uniting?
Yes. If you've got a nectar flow on.
Roger, are you there?
Sorry? Sorry, Nick, I didn't hear you.
Okay, sorry, you just froze for a moment. Okay, when you add the
Yeah, the nucleus in the middle of the box. Take out a number of combs, and just drop your nucleus straight down in the middle. 3-4 combs is usually okay. Now it really needs to be, if you possibly can, during the nectar flow. If there's no nectar flow, you'll probably end up with some fighting. You know, it's really a sort of technique that perhaps only experienced beekeepers should do. I probably, well, this isn't really a beginner's or an early years one anyway, so I don't think beginners should do it, but it's the sort of thing that us experienced beekeepers just do.
All right, the next question is, how do you tell when there is a nectar flow on or off?
Excuse me, I've got a phone going. It's not one of you, folk, is it? I've done that myself, don't worry. Let's give them some of the ideas for the next one, haven't they? Well, if you can tell several ways. If you notice the way the bees are coming back, if they just sort of flop down on the front of the hive or flop down on the floorboard, they're carrying something. Have a look in brood combs. If you've got nectar in amongst the middle of the in amongst the brood during the day, then you've got a nectar flow on. If you just shake a frame and the nectar drips out, again you've got a nectar flow on, because sometimes the flow can stop overnight. Really, it flows one day and not the next. So the following day you shake the same frames and the nectar won't come out. They really do get rid of a lot of water quite quickly. Interestingly, we've had a tremendous flow in West Sussex in the last 4, 5, 6 weeks. And where I've been doing things like queen rearing on top of a hive, you know, grafting, nectar's dripped out of combs on top of another hive roof, and sometimes it stayed there 3 or 4 days, and the bees haven't bothered with it. Now, if you've got a nectar dearth, within seconds they're after it, and you can sometimes have quite a big problem. So yeah, you can tell quite easily. Excuse me a minute, please. Sorry, I'm on a webinar. Can you phone me up in a quarter of an hour, please? Right. Sorry about that.
Okay, Roger. When Can moving the support hive next to honey-producing hive to move the foragers across be used as a swarm prevention strategy?
Can you go through that again, please, Nick?
When you move the support hive next to honey-producing hive
Yeah.
and you move the foragers across, can it be used as a swarm prevention strategy?
It would be the other way, wouldn't it? Yeah. So what the question really means is, could they move the honey-producing colony that's preparing to swarm? Could they move that away and put the support colony in its place? Yeah. Oh, of course you can. It's effectively an artificial swarm, isn't it? The only difference is you're not taking any brood away. You, especially if you've got a little bit of nectar coming in, you can get away with all sorts of tricks with beekeeping. Okay, sometimes they don't repeat what they did a couple of weeks ago, but that's bees for you. But the longer you're in the craft, the longer you realise what you can get away with and what you can't get away with. And
right, and another question related to that is, will the bees not fight when diverted?
No, they don't, because don't forget, the bees that are coming back are carrying something. They are carrying nectar or pollen. So they will usually get accepted. As I said, if you've got if you've got nectar dearth on, then they're not going to bring anything back anyway. And that might, of course, be why they refused entry.
Okay. With all this exchanging, how do you manage virus and Varroa, as you'll be heavily mixing the hives?
I think you just got to keep your Varroa levels as low as you can overall, and then you haven't really got that much of a problem. But I think Varroa it needs a lot more understanding than we know at the moment, because sometimes you can go through a summer and you can come across deformed wings in a colony, let's say early May, and you think, oh, I better do something about that. The next time you go, there's nothing with deformed wings, and they're fine for the rest of the summer. Now I know deformed wings is a sign of heavy or fairly heavy Varroa load, but it's not the only one. Yeah, it'd be difficult to get involved with Varroa control any more than what I think I've told you.
Okay, we've got another question on, you mentioning queens emerging with strange wings. Do you know why this is happening?
Well, I haven't mentioned it here, but yes, they do. I've had, I think, about 3 this year. I've started much more than I had in the past, getting queens emerging into cages. And I think I've had about 3 this year. You tend to get wings almost like deformed wing virus, but then you also get others, and where the wings are normally over the folded over the back of the virgin queen, one is folded over the back and the other one is out at about anything between about 40 and 90 degrees. Now, even if they're full wings, they can't seem to fly. I had one a couple of days ago. I don't know the reason. I've spoken to one of the scientists and they said they thought that it wouldn't be deformed wing virus because the pupation stage of queens is a lot less than, it's about half as what it is of workers. And they didn't think that the deformed wing virus would develop. Whether that's correct or not, I don't know.
Okay.
It would probably be, it would need a virologist, somebody like Steve Martin, to to comment on that.
Okay, another one. At what stage do you remove the old frames from the support colony when you've transferred the bad frames into the support colony? What stage do you remove them?
Well, you need to get rid of all the brood. Don't forget, you've probably got quite a lot of drone in there. And another problem with that, of course, is which I didn't mention, was that if you put the queen excluder in, probably every couple of 3 days, you'll have to empty the drones out because they emerge and they'll clog the excluder up if you're not very careful. So what you've got to do is wait until the drones have emerged. The workers should go a couple of days, 3 days, well, a couple of days before that, 2 or 3 days before that. Then you can either extract the honey or leave it to the end of the year, or there are several tricks that you can use to encourage the bees to remove it.
Okay. Would it be advantageous to keep all bees in a unit related, i.e. queens raised from the same mother?
Don't see any advantage in doing that. Be interesting why the question was asked, actually, but I suppose probably to keep them all fairly consistent. Perhaps that's the thinking behind the question there. But don't forget, you get queens from a different mother. That, let's say you raise 10 queens from one mother, you could have 10 different fathers. You could have quite easily.
Okay. Another question, if you transfer brood to bolster your support colony in autumn, is there a possibility of weakening your main colonies at a time when the queen is slowing down her laying?
That's probably the reason. Can you read that again, Nick? So have you any idea what time they're talking about? Early in the year or later? What does the question say?
It says just that by bolstering your support colony, you're weakening your main colonies.
Well, I think I mentioned bolster towards the end of the year. No, you won't do that, because don't forget, if it's on 11 combs, don't forget, I'm talking about single brood chamber. If it's on 11 combs, you could, towards the end of the year, you're probably down to seven frames with my sort of bees. If you've got prolific bees, then you've, well, you wouldn't have them in a single brood chamber anyway. But you probably have a lot more frames of brood. Each of my colonies at that time could probably lose 2 or 3 frames of brood and not really notice it.
Okay.
But don't forget, you've got four colonies, just one frame, one comb of brood from each, and they're not really going to notice it.
Right. Different topic. Do you always extract the capped brood supers when you've drawn out the supers in the upper box? Do you always extract them before adding to other brood chambers?
Is this the
when you've drawn out deep combs in the box above the queen excluder?
Yep.
If they're full of honey, do you always extract it before you put them into the other brood boxes?
No. One good thing is if you've got nukes or support colonies that are short of food, that's one place to help them out. You can take take a frame of food from above a queen excluder, and you can put it in a nuke. And the great thing about it is that you haven't got to make up syrup, you haven't got to feed it in the evening and all the rest of it. Just shake the bees off and put it straight in, and it doesn't create excitement or anything. Also, what you could do for those that aren't particularly interested in honey is you could actually leave it there and use it for winter food. So your other colonies, when they're um, uh, when they're preparing for the winter, will probably close up quite a bit. But then any empty combs on the outside could be taken out and replaced with these combs of food. Then, of course, you get new combs for next year. If you sell honey, there's no point doing that. You might just will extract it and then feed in a normal way.
Okay, if you have an apiary of 12 colonies, can you move frames around all 12
Oh, yeah.
or only within their unit?
No, treat the apiary as a whole, so they're all helping each other. The unit originally was intended for beekeepers with, sort of 5 hives or less, but it can be expanded, and I expand it myself into, mine are helping each other out all the time.
Okay.
So
And
perhaps,
another...
so sorry, Nick. Yeah, so perhaps one support colony in one group can help out another, in one unit can help out another unit.
Okay. Question, when boosting other colonies, what time of day do you recommend for placing and removing the support colony?
Doesn't matter. No, it's
Okay.
whenever I'm handing the bees, which normally is any time between 7:30 in the morning and this time of the year, anything up to about 8:30 at night.
Okay. Another one, that when adding new comb to the production hives from the support colony, do you put it on the edge of the brood and avoid splitting the brood?
It depends. If you've got a young queen and it's early in the year, you can put it right in the middle, and usually she'll leap on it as fast as she can. If you've got an older queen, perhaps later in the season, she might be reluctant to do that. And then what happens is that she just tends to lay one side of it. I had one of my few older queens about a couple of weeks ago. I did exactly the same thing. I put an empty comb in the middle because what I wanted, well, 2 or 3 weeks later, what I wanted was a frame of sealed brood, and it didn't work. It took her a couple of weeks before she started laying in it. Now that's my fault. We had a nectar flow on, and the queen just flat refused to lay in there. Oh, and another thing that can happen is if you've got a nectar flow on, the bees very often fill it up with honey, or nectar rather, because of course they bring it in and they dump it anywhere.
Okay, I've got another question. Could you modify a brood chamber to overwinter 2 or 3 queens?
Oh yeah, that's been done for years and years and years. The Americans have come up with a term of a queen castle. That's what they call it. Yeah, it's been done for years. I used to think that was a really good idea, and I made up, I suppose, half a dozen like that with a petition in, but I very soon gave them up because I didn't get on too well with them. The problem is moving bees around as I did at the time, not perhaps so much now, but if you want to move colony one side or shake bees out, it becomes quite difficult to do. I much prefer single boxes.
Okay. Roger, we've got a few members who put their hands up to talk. I'm going to allow someone to talk and see what their question is. Okay.
Well, you better tell me who they are first, just in case I don't like them.
Right, okay. So the first one is Michael Forster. He'll need to unmute himself and see if he can ask his question. This may not work, but just seeing whether he's... he did put his hand up fairly early on, so he may have disappeared by now.
Can you hang on a minute? I'll just go and get a copy of Ted Hooper, and I might be able to help answer him.
Okay, well, it looks as though he's not going to speak. So
Perhaps I've already answered his question then.
it's possibly so. I mean, we have overshot our time, and I think maybe we ought to bring it to an end now, Roger. And so this will be on the website tomorrow, and we will put up the PDF of your slides, won't we?
Yep.
So thank you very much.
Well, okay, yeah. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you again whenever it is. Okay. Bye everyone.